Adjusting the raid difficulty curve. Let's listen to that.
There was one thing that actually was interesting that Skarsgård said. Like, what if they just buffed the boss? Or like, because we were talking about you guys were talking about the difficulty curve, right?
Mhm.
And he said,
Yeah.
maybe not nerfing Overnax or Kaiveza was the right move, and maybe it was better to just like have harder previous bosses. And in my mind, that was like, sounded kind of wild because I'm just expecting like, oh, so what if this means that instead of just one shotting the first four bosses, it became doing first boss, it's still probably like one shot, and then second boss probably like 5-10 pulls, third boss probably like 20-30, and then fourth boss Rashanon probably like 40-50. Like that would be crazy, right?
He didn't imply that Brood Twister and Nexus Princess Kaiveza were at a correct level of tuning. He just said that in both Amir Drasil with Tindril and in this raid with like Rashanan and Sikran, that made Brood Twister more of a problem. And also that is true, but you're doing two different things. So to make Sikran and Rashanan the correct level of difficulty to make something like Brood Twister not seem like that big of a jump, there's also another issue with Brood Twister where it's like, it's a bad kind of difficulty. Like, Brood Twister's hard for multiple reasons, but a big reason you wiped is people got a weak aura assignment and didn't go to the right egg. Now that's a mechanic problem. Like, weak auras make that part easier, but like, imagine that without weak auras, like that mechanic is just like too hard with too much punishment. I think that's for the fifth boss in the raid. That's just like not great, But I've heard people be like, I've seen a few comments just every time this has gotten brought up where they just simply can't understand that sometimes you spending more time on an earlier boss or a normal amount of time on an earlier boss can make a later boss less bullshit. And I don't understand how people can't get that. I understand it's like a little weird because you're like, I don't like things being hard at all. So why would things being harder be better? Let's use the two extreme examples, okay? So Mythic Ansurek in week 1, okay? Versus Mythic Ansurek in the last week of Cutting Edge, which is this week. You pick any particular guild, there's a chance that the boss in the last week of Cutting Edge, it's the same boss, is going to be more fair for their guild than the one in week 1 of Mythic Progression. Now, you're probably listening to this and you're like, of course. I'm using two very polar extremes for a reason. So that tells you that you can fight the same boss later in a patch and it can be fair for you where it would not have been fair earlier. So the idea that, for example, if the raid was just you zone in and you go to Queen Ansurek, it would be completely unfair. Mythic sucks. Why is this like this? This is way too hard. Like, generally speaking, a boss can be hard, but like you want to get to a boss at a point where it's fair for your guild. And that's the hard thing about WoW raid difficulty is there's a wide-ranging level of guild skill levels. So it's like, how hard should a boss be is really hard to tell because it spans over a whole patch, So like you getting to a boss like Brood Twister or really any boss that's like hard 2 weeks later because you spent more time on earlier bosses, that boss could require 0 nerfs and actually be fair for your guild purely due to time passing. So that argument has logic to it. It's just true. Like, that is the case. There's bosses you have fought that you maybe hated because they were so hard, and if you got there weeks later, it just simply, either due to the increase of gear or power or a nerf, would have not felt bullshit or unfun. That's just true, right? So that makes sense, but I know people don't understand that. But also that is battling with another very important thing, which is something that people really like this patch, and something that Dorky brought up, is that you can have the first 4 bosses be pretty puggable. Like 1 through Rashanan was like, you could get a 2-box in Mythic with multiple tier pieces like pretty early in the patch as a pug, which is, in my opinion, also very good for the game, right? And having that be in contention with a good difficulty curve, I think, is the problem. So this is why my take in all of this is I think 8 bosses is too little. Like, strongly believe that 8 bosses is too little. If not for any other reason, then I don't think Rashanan was way easier as a 4th boss than most 4th bosses. So like we one-shot Rashanan, which was honestly kind of insane because we just like completely ulted it and had no idea how the fight was going to work. But like most people, Rashanan's official like pull count across all of progression for guilds is 10 to 19 pulls for a first kill. That for a 4th boss is super fair. That's not bullshit. That's like a okay 4th boss. And Brood Twister is the 4th to last boss, which took 100 pulls. That is, I think maybe it was less than that. I don't exactly remember, but Brood Twister was really hard. And it got nerfed, and it was probably a little too hard. But for the 4th to last boss, it's not super far off the difficulty of where that boss should be in a raid. The, like, you know, last boss, second to last boss, third to last boss, fourth to last boss. The issue is those two bosses were right against each other. So my take is, I think there just simply needs to be more bosses ramping and connecting the difficulty of a Rashinan and a Brood Twister in between bosses 4 and 5. Like, let's say, you know, bosses 5 and 6, but then there are just 10 bosses instead of 8. I think 10 is actually like the good. I think more than 10 bosses, every raid that's had more than 10 bosses, you could pick a few that didn't need to exist. They kind of ran out of good ideas, or the boss just fucking sucked, right? And I think 8, we've run into this problem 2 times, right? Or we've run into it a couple times where not correct amount of bosses will lead to bad difficulty curve issues. Because I just don't believe, like, because you have to get from point A to point B, right? What the fuck is this graph about? Does anyone remember? Something to the War Within. This was about raid difficulty over the course of, I'm almost positive, if this was on a game show of Potty C Jeopardy, I'm almost positive this is the War Within, and this was the beginning of the game, and this was raid difficulty, and I was meant to say that the raid difficulty has done this, and every time it's done jumps, and no one cares. This is an old conversation. Doesn't matter. No, D does not stand for dong. In this context, it does sometimes. We're going to do another D here. So D for difficulty this time, not dong. And this is boss. This is the first boss, and let's forget about how many bosses there are. Let's just say this is the L for last boss. L last boss. Okay? The difficulty for the first boss is all the way down here. Okay? And the difficulty for the last boss is all the way up here. My only take is, and I'm not 100% sure on it, they can prove me wrong, but every time there's been like an 8-boss raid, there's something weird in between here and here. And when you're trying to do this area here with only 6 other bosses, there's just going to be a massive spike in difficulty somewhere that doesn't make sense. At least that's what it seems. So I think the answer to these difficult, and we'll see this raid, maybe they do it well this raid or not this raid, I don't know, right? I can actually kind of tell you how hard I think every boss will be, if that is something that you find interesting, but like, I don't think this is enough bosses to do this. This line is too steep, and I don't think the first boss being this hard is too easy, and I don't think this is too hard. Up here, that looks like a nipple. Let's not talk about it, right? And then all the time, it's just like, this isn't enough bosses. You need more bosses to do that. You heard me? You heard?